Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am absolutely delighted as I have an amazing powerhouse leader in the ring with me today. I have Dr. Nekeshia Hammond, who is going to join me in some very meaty, very rich conversation. And as you know, this is our platform. This is our space to really talk about what leadership means today, really define and disrupt maybe the definition a little bit and get into those courageous conversations to open up a really vulnerable space so that we can dig in more. And so before I formally introduce her, let me just say welcome and thank you to Dr. Hammond for joining us. Nekeshia, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So I am excited because I have no idea where our conversation is going to go, as always. So we're going to have some fun. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Nekeshia Hammond. She is the TV show host of Parenting Explained with Dr. Hammond and the author of ADHD Explained, What Every Parent Needs to Know. She is also a speaker, psychologist, and business owner. Dr. Hammond is the owner of Hammond Psychology and Associates and has been featured on NBC, ABC, and CBS, as well as various magazines, radio shows throughout the country. She is a wealth of information around parenting strategies, especially with children that are experiencing ADHD. And so I'd love to dig into that a little bit with you. How did your journey get you here?
Wow. Yeah. So I've really always had a passion to work with children and families. And I think going into graduate school, if I could back up way back then, I really wanted to open a practice and really help children and families. But I really noticed a couple years in that while I love what I do in the office, there were so many other children and families outside of the office, obviously. I mean, it's a big world, right? It really helps. So that moved me a couple years ago into media, which I love because I can reach so many more people, and just writing books just to reach as many people as possible with this message of how to reduce the stigma of mental health and help children, especially with ADHD.
Yeah. So I'm curious because I feel like sometimes, and I'm sure you get this a lot, I feel like the term ADHD is thrown around a lot. I almost feel like it's one of those life buzz bingo words, whatever you want to call it. And so what is, first off, a couple or a few of the biggest myths around people who just self-diagnose or are willing to put that label? I think there's a lot of stigma around that label. And for a lot of people, I feel like sometimes it can be a cop-out. And so I'm curious as to what you found to be some of the myths or some of the stories that go around that space around ADHD and having children, who are stigmatized with that.
Yeah, there's so many myths. And well, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I wanted to dispel so many myths. My biggest aggravation in life at this point is when kids are diagnosed with ADHD after being seen for like 5 or 10 minutes in their doctor's office. I mean, it's horrible. So the myth is that, well, this child is being hyperactive and they can't concentrate, so they have ADHD, which is horrendous. That's why there's so many kids with this diagnosis. It's an easy go-to. And then there's just immediate, like, here's some medication to solve your problems. When the reality is it could be many different things, which is why a thorough evaluation is needed, because we're talking about, it could be depression, anxiety, a behavior issue, a learning disability. I mean, the list goes on, but the biggest myth is that if you can't concentrate and you're hyperactive, you have ADHD, which is not true.
Yeah. And I find it interesting because I'm a person that, people are like, oh, you were so great in school. You were this. I'm like, I have a photographic memory. It was kind of like we teach in one way and we expect everyone learns that way and adapts. And I think even with myself, and you'll see me, for those of you that are watching us on video and not audio, I don't sit still. I don't know how to sit still. Even when I'm processing, and I'm a big thinker, and I mean, I have an engineering degree and I've gone to grad school and done some of the extra work. And I can remember taking tests and needing to have a baseball hat so that I could fidget, so that I could process. I'm an external processor anyway. And I need that out there. And I think about that terminology wasn't really a norm when we were kids. But I think of, as I watch my friends raising kids, and I'm like, they're kids. And I feel like there's this distinction around wanting to label our children in every capacity versus really understanding how they learn in that space. And so as you play in that space, I mean, this is your space and you see this all the time. How do you counsel, coach work with the parents to help
Mm-hmm.
them take a step back and pause to really get into what's happening versus
Yeah.
just being shooted on or being conditioned to be like, I need to just create a label and be done with it.
Yeah.
And I just don't have space or time because everybody's
Mhm.
running so hard. How do you slow them
Yeah.
down and have the big conversation?
Yeah. So that's a great question, by the way, Candy, because really to slow parents down, you have to look at the whole child, which oftentimes it's like a laser focus. He or she is not doing well in school, and they're hyperactive and they're getting into trouble. They have ADHD. No, wrong approach. So there's the whole child. So that's the thing that I look at in my office all the time. What is going on at home? What's going on in school? Is there any health issues? What's their learning like? There's like 20 other aspects that really parents need to think about. But again, the most important thing is to get to a mental health professional to determine, is it really ADHD or not? Because again, like you said, it's the buzzword and
Right.
it's not always the case.
So what from a clinical standpoint? So I think that's great. And I think the idea, and I want to come back to this idea of a whole child. I want to talk a little bit more about what that really means. But I think even before we have that conversation, it's from a clinical standpoint, what is the actual definition of ADHD? Because I do think it is just a label that there's a lot of people that don't even know what it means.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so what does that really mean from a clinical sense? And what are the real signs or symptoms that say, look, you really need to have a conversation with a mental health professional to say, are these symptoms related to that?
Yeah, so it looks like a lot of different things depending on the child, obviously, or adult. But really, it is having a difficult time focusing, sometimes hyperactivity, or being impulsive, or squirming, or whatever it is that's going on. But the major key thing is it causing a disruption in functioning, which means that is it really affecting your grades in school or your home life or your social life or your job? Is it to that point? Because like you said, you mentioned yourself, or a lot of people, you're hyperactive and you think a lot and your thoughts are all over. Okay, but you're functioning, you're doing amazing. Right? So that's one of the key things that people don't often think about. To get to a point where it's a disorder, a clinical problem, it has to be really disrupting your functioning. And there are many people that are really successful, label or not. There's many people that have those symptoms and they do amazing things.
So what do you find? Because I agree. And I think about even the boxes. And I know, like, even in the first chapter of my book, I call it the tube box. Because it was amazing to me. I remember coloring. I was 5 years old and coloring a picture where I was having, the sky was red and purple and orange. And I had a teacher come over and say, the sky needs to be blue. I was like, but the sky wasn't blue last night. And I think about those boxes and those constraints.
Oh, yes.
From a psychological standpoint, and as we look at the development, because I think about even what's going on generationally as our next generations are coming up, and whether they've had the helicopter parents or they've had this sense of entitlement, which I personally think our generation, the Gen Xers, are the epitome of entitlement and have taught that behavior. It's a whole nother subject. What is the repercussions, or what are the risks of self-diagnosis or imposing those labels? What does that do psychologically to a child or a person when they start to buy into that belief? What is the repercussions of that on a short and long-term basis?
Yeah, it could have some really negative repercussions, like you said, because even going into teen years, going into adulthood years, when you're misdiagnosed and you're thinking you have a condition that you don't have, or you do have that condition, but you had something completely missed. There are many kids that are on medications that don't need to be. There's a low risk, but there's a risk of, heart issues and all sorts of other side effects when you're misdiagnosing a child. There's also a lot of kids I see, some of them have issues, and that's another piece, probably another topic, but they have issues with their self-esteem, as I mentioned, because they think they're like, I'm not normal and I'm crazy, or there's something wrong with me, which is not true. Just because you think differently, or you have a different brain, or you have a different condition. But kids need to be helped in that regard. Understand that just because you have a condition, it doesn't make you a bad kid.
Yeah. Well, and I think that goes back into a bigger space around the mental health profession
Yeah.
and space. Because I mean, I have a lot of mental health in my family, issues in my family, a lot of depression, bipolar tendencies, manic depression, clinical depression, narcissism. There's just a slew of things that have been clinically diagnosed, have gone through the proper channels, where I think about that. And I think about the fact that we're not, as a culture, educated around mental health. And I think what I've found is one of two things are showing up. And I would love to know where some of the opportunities are as a person of our society, of culture, of someone who's a leader taking responsibility. How can leaders start to take more ownership or responsibility when I've seen two sides of the equation? One, it's I'm just going to self-diagnose and label myself, and therefore I get to give myself the excuse and cop out and go, well, I'm clinically depressed, so therefore that's why I can't show up this way. Okay, seriously, cop out. But there's the big and of, there is also people that are significantly, truly struggling in those spaces that where we don't have education or have compassion or have understanding, we are not showing up in a way to serve those people. We're actually doing further detriment. We're shutting them down. I think about everything that's going on right now. I mean, you can't help. I don't even watch the news. I can't. Yet you still know what's going on. And I think some of it's because we're not stepping into a bigger conversation around mental health and what that really means. And so as someone who is, a clinical physician in this space, where's the opportunity for us as leaders to engage in a different conversation or to educate ourselves? Where do we start?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And number one is to understand that, first of all, everyone has mental health, because there's this stigma that, mental health is bad, or you're crazy, or you're weak, or all these things that are not true. But really, like you said, to educate yourself. So let's say you have a sibling or a parent or a coworker or whomever in your life. Most people do know someone in their life with a mental health condition. Take time to educate yourself about that, because I've heard too many times, just like ADHD is thrown around with bipolar disorder. Oh, he's so bipolar, he's so OCD, or we just make up all these things, and it's so not true. And to the people that really do experience true bipolar disorder, OCD, ADHD, or what have you, like, sometimes it's very debilitating and it's insulting to say those kind of terms. So we need to be careful of things we say and how we say them too, because it can be really insulting to people. So I think watching our language and definitely educating ourselves, especially family members and close friends in our lives, to try to understand a little bit what they're going through, and taking the time to really talk to them and what is it like for them. Because I can talk to 10 different people with depression and they have totally different experiences.
Yeah. And I think that's powerful, because I do think that when people think they understand a term, or they think that they are like, okay, well, I get it, because my dad was, diagnosed clinically narcissistic, even by the military. And I'm like, yes. And how he demonstrated that, and how, when I dated a guy who demonstrated some very different qualities, but also was clinically diagnosed, they were very different. And so I do think there's a lot of damaging space when I think that is in general. I think there's this space where we have, and I don't know what drives that, but we have this need to generalize, to categorize, to label everything. There's this judgment that's underlying that. How do we start to, and another space, and I look at this as someone who, this is the work you do, how do you help people navigate through releasing some of that judgment, releasing some of that need to put people in a box, or put a category or label, good or bad or indifferent, whatever, because there's all kinds of flavors of it. How do you help people work through that and change maybe that learned behavior? Because I do think it's a learned behavior. What are some of the strategies or ways that you work with people to release that?
Yeah. So one of the biggest questions I get from parents is, or concerns that I get sometimes, is, I don't want my child to be labeled. But there's good and bad things about a label. There honestly is. So what I try to remind parents of, though, is, if your child had cancer or diabetes or heart condition or whatever else, you would be telling everyone about it, because it's a medical condition that's accepted by society. But because there's a label of mental health, like depression or anxiety or whatever else behavioral issue, then we are at the point where we're afraid say that. I have some parents, it's really sad, and this is something to answer your question that I try to explain to them, that they don't want the school to know of the condition their child has because of the label and the stereotypes. And they do exist. You're absolutely right. There's some teachers that have stereotypes about certain mental health illnesses, but the problem is children can get accommodations or modifications in the school system when the school does know what's going on with them. That can be helpful to them in life and later on too when they have a job.
Yeah. So, and what's really, actually, there's something that just kind of clicked for me, because I remember, because you mentioned when we have some of those acceptable medical.
Yes.
But I think about when my brother was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. He was 7 years old, and it was not something that was accepted at the time. I mean, he's going to be, how old am I? Let's just play that game. 41, he's going to be, I believe. But when he was diagnosed, there was very little information around it. And there was a lot of blame that was placed on the parents that if your child got type 1 diabetes, it must be a function of what the parent was doing or the diet or this. And you need to take ownership. And there was a lot of blame that happened in my family. Actually, it was one of the pivotal moments, even though that it was already the writing was on the wall. It was one of the pivotal moments that actually was the one of the deciding points where my parents divorced, because there was so much connected into that blame. But there was a lot of shame. And I remember even going into the schools, there was a lot of shame around not wanting to tell the schools that, but we had to, because he had a needle, right? And so you had to do it. But there was all this discussion and conversation. And so I think about that, because I think about how, almost 40 years ago, there wasn't that conversation where it was accepted. It was still a kind of not really understood, not known space. And so I think about that as, we can spend a lot of time in the what if and play kind of the negative slant. And it's a lot of what I've been focused on this year is, we play in this very anchoring what if this, what if that, what if the label versus. And so I would wonder and would love to play in this a little bit with you. I have no idea where this might go, but as we imagine if that 40 years ago was the case for something like diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, what's the big imagine if that you get excited about when you think about, especially being purposeful about using a media outlet to get out there and carry a message? What's the driving force behind that? What's the big imagine if that you're like, I can see the day when this is the conversation we're having, and I'd love to know what that looks like.
Yeah. So what it looks like and what's exciting is, I think of imagine if parents really understood, number one, how to properly get their child evaluated in the field of mental health, and number two, how to help them at home and at school, because literally it's saving lives for many children, like to have that opportunity. And we know there's a million research studies out there. Early intervention is so important. I mean, literally, when I say saving lives, I literally mean saving lives. Right. So instead of a child being more at risk in their teen years or in their adult years, they can have healthier, happier, productive lives. That is so exciting to me, to really give that knowledge to parents.
Nice. And how do you see that impacting our youth if we really had that early intervention sooner? Because, I mean, we all know what's happening, right? So how does that change the conversation for our kids?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it would have huge impacts. Like if kids got the help they needed early, you would see less suspensions, you would see less drug use, you would see, less severe forms of mental health forming later on. It would potentially affect their relationships in life, their relationship with their supervisor, with their significant other. I mean, it's such a huge change just by changing what we're doing earlier on for parents, and parents understanding and knowing what to do. It's incredible. Wow. That's definitely my hope. It would literally change the planet, like for parents to have this information. So that's exciting.
That's beautiful. And that is exciting. And so I'm curious, as you're kind of thinking about this, man, that's the hope, right? Is that we change that. It's amazing. I was talking to Gary Stewart earlier, and he had a comment about one drop of consciousness affects the entire ocean, right? And I love that. And it just gives me chills. And I mean,
it's so cool.
That, right. And so I think about that's the big imagine if, right? That we're creating that massive change. So what's on the horizon for you now? What's the next level of where you're creating that movement, that motion, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So my next endeavor is definitely the TV show, and getting it onto more networks, Parenting Explained with Dr. Hammond, and just getting that message out there. I interview parenting experts, and I absolutely love it. It's usually in the area of mental health or education, getting that education out there. And then it's so important. I mean, all of us can take the time, it's absolutely free, but on our social media platforms to share good, solid information about ways to help youth. I mean, if we all did that, I mean, we obviously know the effects, but really to be a part of that. And then I'm excited. I'm working on launching an online parenting program, really, parenting classes to really help parents through this journey, especially with ADHD.
Wow. That's really, I mean, I just think it's powerful. I think it's powerful that you are doing this work. And I think to have a venue, because I do think that's what, there is that shame piece, or there's that, I don't know where to go, or I feel like I'm all alone and I don't want to put this out there, but that space to feel like you're loved and supported. And as a parent, because I know, and like I said, watching my parents go through, especially my mom, when my brother was diagnosed, the guilt she carried around, I must not be a good parent because, and that was the conversation. And to help parents uncover, realize, stand in the space to say, there are contributing factors, yes, and some of this has nothing to do with me. It's just about how can I support that? Because I would imagine that that's a big conversation.
Oh, huge.
Is having people release that attachment, that guilt, that, well, I must have done something wrong. I'm a bad parent if my kid is this. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of those conversations? How do you work through some of those conversations? And are you having a problem with your body?
Oh, there we go.
Sound?
Okay. We're good.
But that space around, they put that blame on themselves. And so how does that affect how they're showing up, and what's the conversation to help them release some of that immediate, well, then I must suck as a parent because my kid is X.
Yeah, and I do hear that often, and it's so hard, and that's something I think I wrote like 10 times in the book, probably, just for parents not to blame themselves. There are so many conditions, like you said, that no matter the greatest parents in the world, and no matter how amazing your parenting is, I mean, there's just certain conditions that children have, and it's not at all the parents' fault. But the good news is that there's a lot of things that the parents can do to help their child, but it doesn't help, and I know it's hard to say this and not easy, but it doesn't help to blame yourself. Right. More so, the more important thing is for parents to take the time for self-care, to work on themselves so they can continue to be the best parents as possible. But it is, and it's a process, definitely, but it's so important not to get into the blame game as parents.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that you just mentioned self-care. I think that's where most caretakers, where most people that get in those situations, I even look at, again, going back to my own mother with my brother, how much you put out to help and want to fix, that you lose sight, especially women, lose sight of how to take care of themselves through that process. And do you have a tip or two in terms of, maybe you've got a child that really is clinically in more of that extreme space. How do you take care of yourself when it's really challenging to support and honor and love and help in that space? What are maybe one or two strategies that you offer for those parents who are really deep in it and haven't pulled themselves out to say, man, I am exhausted. Yeah. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do, because they're not serving in the best way they can be serving.
Yeah. And I see a lot of those parents that are just like, I don't know what else to do, like you mentioned. And one of the things that I would highly recommend, I find that a lot of times parents have good support system many times, but are not utilizing it. So I have many parents too that don't want to leave their child, and I love parent and child interaction time, but it also is so important to take a break, especially there just are some children that have stronger needs. And it's so important for the parent to take the time away, even if it's like 2 hours, you know, a little bit of time. But the parents have to make a commitment to do that, because it only makes them a better parent. Because I have many parents that say they struggle with that. That it's like, I want to be with my child 24/7 as often as I can, which is great to spend the quality time. But again, just making sure to make the commitment to do something, some type of hobby, even a little bit of time. And there's a lot, even if, you know, you're in a city where there's not a lot of, you know, family and friends that you have, there's respite programs, and there's a lot of community resources out there too. I mean, there's Parents Night Out now. I feel like it's like all over the place. They have these Parent Night Out programs at museums and all sorts of things where they'll, you know, keep a child for a couple hours. But making sure to take care of yourself is vital, and taking that time away.
Yeah, and I know I work with a lot of parents, not, you know, in the space that you do, but just in terms of either they're building a business or they're in corporate, they've got multiple things they're juggling. And I always find it interesting. And I've had, you know, really tough conversations where, you know, people are like, my kids are my first priority. My challenge always is, and that's where there's the opportunity and the miss, because you've got to be your first priority. You can't give what you don't have filled back up. Exactly. And it's even allowing those parents, I said, look, you're so focused on your child not playing and not doing this and not functioning, but you haven't played. And it's even little things like, is your inner child getting the opportunity to do something that's just silly and frivolous and ridiculous? And you don't understand the power of, one, a healing through that, but two, just, and I mean, it's amazing how sometimes, and people think it's crazy, but I'll have C-level executives I work with that I'm like, look, you have 2 to 5 minutes every day. I'm like, what's your favorite Disney song or Muppet song or whatever? And all of a sudden I'll hear a CFO or a CEO jamming out to like some Disney song. And I'm like, and how do you feel? And they're like, oh my God, I don't know the last time I just felt that light. And I said, you've got to create that space.
Exactly.
Because if you do everything that's off for your kids all the time, you're losing a sense of self, and you're not role modeling how to take personal responsibility for whatever's moving in your life. And and so I've had people where I've said, if your children are really your first priority, what then are you role modeling? And if you can't do this for yourself right now, then what is it you want your kids to know at 40 years old when they're having the same struggles?
And I love that you mentioned that too, about the role modeling, because that piece is so important too. Like, what are we teaching our kids when we're overscheduling them? We're overscheduling ourselves. Not that we're not having busy weeks here. I know about busy weeks. But really, we are role modeling for them too. Like, take a break. Like, take a minute, you know, for yourself.
Well, and there's busy weeks that show up because we're purposeful about, like for me right now, I have a busy week because I'm purposely front loading some things because I know I'm going to be on the road for 2 weeks and I have big trainings and things. And I want to really make sure momentum of some messaging and some things I'm doing is very deliberate. But I also know that coming into this week, I knew it was going to be a quote, high productivity. I actually don't like the word busy. I actually am like, it's a very purposeful productivity week.
Yeah, I love that.
And I unplugged Friday afternoon through Sunday. I wasn't on email. I wasn't on social media. I wasn't on my phone.
That's awesome.
Because in order to show up full out, I've had my calendar pretty booked this week. This is my, you know, second or third show we're doing today to get it queued up for the, you know, to roll out. And it takes a lot of presence. It takes, so carrying and creating that space. I know coming off a big 3-day event, I then carve out 2 days that I completely don't talk to a human being, and I go to the spa and so it is that space of understanding, because we've created this cycle. And I know you feel this, and especially with parents that are in this space, I feel like they've allowed themselves that condition even more, to be busy for the sake of busy, to be always doing something that if they are not moving and shake, then they don't feel like they're being valuable. And because there is some of that blame and that shame that's coming on them, that I don't feel like a good parent, then, well, I got to push this and I got to push this and I got to push this and I got to push this, instead of saying, what is I'm really trying to work towards? Because our conversation, I feel like in our culture, has not become this connecting and communicating. It's become this complaining and commiserating. And it's that space of, oh, I'm so busy. And then the other person's like, oh, please, girl, you think you're busy? Let me tell you how busy I am. And it's like, who can outsuck who, right?
We're always competing on busyness,
Right. And I feel like there's parents that have gotten in that space of who can outsuck who on whose kid has the crazier thing.
Yes.
And we've almost gone from being afraid of the label to I'm going to have a badge of honor because my kid's a bigger pain than yours is.
Yeah.
And so and I feel like we get caught up in this cycle where it's like, seriously, who can outsuck who?
Yeah.
And we've lost sight of how to take care of ourselves and where the focus is.
Right.
Really
Instead of, like you said, like,
showing up?
Definitely. Instead of like you said, take a step back and let's think about like, what are the strengths? Like, no, like you said, conversations usually are that, like, here's all the things, that are wrong with my child, but let's like reverse that a little bit and think about their strengths and the things that they're amazing at. Right. And that's something that parents actually, I would highly recommend that they take the time to tell their children that, because oftentimes with a label, if we will, let's say ADHD, kids start to think like all sorts of things that are not true about them. I'm like, I just did all this testing for you. Your IQ is off the chart. Like, you're really, really smart. You have great social skills. You have this, that, like, here's all these positive things. Yes, you have ADHD, but you have like 25 other amazing strengths,
right.
Because it for kids too, it's like, oh, it's ADHD and that's all it is. And I'm like, no, that's just one little part of you.
Right.
You have so many other amazing things, and parents need to remind their kids of that too.
Yeah, because imagine that conversation, right? Imagine if we were raising our children to think about their gifts.
Yes.
To say, so I might be deficient here, then I go find someone else that fills that gap and helps me. Because guess what? I don't need to be good at everything. And this deficiency, while a label, might not even be anything I need to focus on, because I do have these other gifts that actually helps me be in. I mean, like we talked about, I can't even imagine if I were a person that sat still. I would be a very different person if I wasn't.
And you're highly successful. You're doing amazing things.
Right. And so I use some of that and channel that energy. And I think about, I love some of these schools that are starting to create standing desks or meditation.
I love it.
Imagine if I was taught how to meditate to quiet down. When I was younger, instead of getting told and chastised and reprimanded for the fact that literally I got told on report, too inquisitive, too big of a thinker, you're punishing the very thing that allows me to open up access to more, because you choose not to understand it. And I think about even kids with autism and Down syndrome, and I think about the very first thing we put in their head when they enter this world. You're broken, you're not enough, you're this, versus us taking the time and care to communicate on their level. Because imagine that, right? Imagine if we actually taught to, I think what Harvard said, there's at least 13 unique, very different styles of learning. And we teach the one that is, in my opinion, the least effective, the cheapest, least effective, and it's a put in everybody in it. And if you have a photographic memory, you win. And if you don't, you fail.
Yeah. Which is horrible.
Because
you're absolutely right.
We don't teach and communicate or learn how to communicate at their level.
And you're right, because what we're doing is punishing creativity, basically, and punishing differences. And like I've told a million kids, I feel like, you are different in this aspect, but different doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean deficient. It doesn't mean you're less than. It doesn't mean that. And like you said, and so what? Okay, you don't have the highest IQ in the world, but you're amazing in sports, or you're amazing in the arts, or whatever else it is. Like you have gifts, you have strengths. But
some of the most amazing entrepreneurs and quote successful people dropped out of high school, don't have a very high. They have something else that propelled them forward, and I love that, because imagine if we celebrated differences instead of trying to make everyone the same. I look at organizations that do that, and they talk diversity and inclusion. I'm like, okay, you might have the diversity piece down. You do not have the inclusion piece down. Yeah. Recruiting different, making the same is not celebrating differences.
Yeah. And as you mentioned before, especially with education. I mean, that's another one of my bigger frustrations, but I tell parents all the time, let's say their child has a learning disability. It doesn't mean they're not smart. It just means they learn in a different way. And like you said, because we have this school system where everyone has to be put in a box and you have to learn the same way, that's absolutely ridiculous, because in real life, there's not one type of job for everyone. I mean, we have all different types of jobs because we're different. But in the school system, we're expected to all be the same, which is
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think it's funny because I'll get a label. People say, "Candy, you know, you're smart, you're intelligent," and well, you went to engineering school. I'm like, that has nothing to do with my intelligence. It had to do with the fact that I have a photographic memory and I could get A's and B's. And now I did study pretty hard in engineering school, but I'm like, honestly, I don't. As someone who did a lot of school and always liked being a student, I don't feel that my intelligence came from the structure of the schooling I did. It was more around what I did additional. It's the books I read. It's the conversations I engaged in. It's the experience I chose to bring in. And I mean, I can remember even in a business law class arguing because it was all true, false, multiple choice. And I had got a grade that I was not in agreement with. And so we stood in the hall and I'm like, you know, and the question would be, okay, this is just so, and I would give 5 examples of why it wasn't. Well, I know, but 80%, it doesn't say 80% of the time. It doesn't say excluding these experiences. And the fact is I can actually think beyond, and I even look at some of those aptitude tests. I mean, I went to engineering school, but it's not because my ACT got me in. It's because I had to write and communicate that I was at the level to play there because I can overanalyze and overthink. Because they're not designed to check my intelligence. They're designed to check whether or not I was conditioned to learn in a certain way.
Exactly.
Which I'm not a, whatever that is, group think, that's just, I'm just not how I play. And so think about the possibilities if we really created more education, both for students and adults.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we would literally change.
That had like tentacles that had various flavors of how we were getting that education, you know, and worked on, some people are visual and auditory and kinesthetic, and then there's layers inside of that. I mean, that alone is different ways to learn.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to learn, as you mentioned. And I think, honestly, it's like an amazing gift to give a child the ability to understand how to manage their emotions, because when you have that skill, which is not, you know, math or science or whatever else, like you said, with the meditation and the social emotional learning that they're doing in some schools that are open to it, you're giving a child like a gift to be able to function better as an adult. We need to really focus on that. And that's my imagine if also. I mean, imagine if we really spent the time to teach, you know, life skills when they're kids instead of just subject.
Oh, it blows my mind that kids don't know how to change a tire, don't know how to balance a checkbook, don't know how to cook dinner, don't know how to wash dishes, don't know how, I mean, anything. And I laugh because I had a client in corporate who he's like, we decided to run a test and he has 2 kids that have very different personalities. And I said, what if you just told them what the outcome was you wanted? Because he wanted them to clean their room and what they need, what was the kind of the end game, and got out of their way and let them both. He goes, it was amazing how they approached it. It was so wildly different. And he goes, I never recognized that I kept trying to teach them the same. He's like, it was so empowering to see all I have to do is say, here is that, okay, do you understand what we're looking for? Are we in agreement? And I'm going to get out of how you choose to do that. And I'm going to say, I'm here if you need help or to vet a solution, but just know that we're all in agreement that by this date, this is what we're looking for as an outcome. How you get there, I don't care. And he goes, the creativity that they put into how they chose to organize and how they chose to clean. And he goes, and it looked different, and yet it got us the same result.
Right.
In a very different place. And I'm like,
because he gave them the freedom.
Right.
He gave them the freedom. They took the initiative, and it's okay. Like you said, as long as you get to the goal, you know, so what if you have a different route? That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the fact that you just said it's okay, right? Those 2 words are powerful. It's okay. I'm okay. You're okay. It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
It's going to be okay.
You're right.
Yeah.
So Nekeshia, how can people get a hold of you? I would love for especially the parents out there who are like, oh my gosh, thank you. There's a space that I can have this conversation. What's the best way for them to continue the conversation or engage with you?
The best way is through my website. It's drnekeshiahammond.com. It's DrNekeshia Hammond.com.
Awesome. And so I love this conversation that we're having. Love the work that you're doing. I think it's so powerful, and absolutely love that you're taking it out on a much bigger platform so that it's not just a one-to-one conversation. It really is you getting out and being that voice, that space that you can create to help parents navigate because it's not like, I always think it's interesting. It's the one thing we don't have to get certified or be licensed. I mean, you have to get a license to drive a car, but you don't have to be a parent. So they just get thrown in it, right?
Yeah,
and so
you
to
do.
have a space where they can figure some things out.
Yeah, for sure. And I love your show. I really thank you for the invitation. I love
absolutely.
your show. I think you're a phenomenal host. Love it.
Thank you. Well, I am so glad you're here and so deeply honored to have you as a guest. And as we're closing things out, is there something you want to have the audience consider, think about, or that one maybe aha that you're like, I want to leave you with this?
Mm-hmm. I really want to leave parents with a lot of hope and to understand, well, let me leave you with this. Understand that when there's statistics, there's so many out there. Let's say it's, 30% of ADHD kids will do this and that, and we always focus on the negative. Try to reverse that around, because if 30% are going to be failures and this and that and all the negative, that means 70% are going to do amazing things. And you're going to be okay. You really are. It takes education to understand the process, but your child will be okay. I've seen many kids that are okay.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, your statistics are only as good as the context they're in anyway. And I always think it's funny when they're like 4 out of 5 dentists. I'm like, is that 4 out of 5 or 400 out of 500? It really does matter.
It does matter.
When you did graduate level statistics seriously can be manipulated in every way possible from the context you put them in. So be very careful about that. And I think that's a great aha is know where you're getting your information, know what the information is really speaking about, and then make your own decisions inside that space. Because again, it's what perspective do you want to have? Do you want to focus on the fact that 30% of kids are struggling with, or do you want to focus on the fact that 70% aren't? And do you want to focus on where the gifts and the opportunity are? Because you can look at things as this is heavy, this is anchoring, this is the space of a what if, or you can look at that space that says this is really open and awesome, and it's a gift, and imagine if this is actually something to be celebrating versus something to be condoning. And so I think that space around knowing, understanding, synthesizing, asking for help with resources like Dr. Hammond, when those statistics are being present, rather than thinking it's like the stop self-diagnosing on WebMD, go out and talk to a real physician that's going to run some tests to say, you're not dying, you're okay. And know that it is your job, it is your responsibility to stand in a space to be a leader. And that includes for yourself and with your family. And it includes for your kids and how you're role modeling. So as always, I want you to remember that it starts with you saying yes to yourself. It starts with you destroying the noise. And some of that's all this labeling and statistics and things that are swimming around us. And it's standing in a space to say, I get to choose how I show up. I get to choose how I serve others, and I'm going to take that personal responsibility inside those two spaces, because leadership's a choice. And I have such deep gratitude and appreciation for the work that Dr. Hammond is doing. I love, Nekeshia, that you joined us. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much.
Please let me know how I can continue to support you on this journey. For the rest of you, thank you so much for tuning in once again. I hope you are getting some really good, juicy nuggets that you can take back into your life and truly create more purpose, passion, and intention for how you're choosing to show up with the leader. With that, I'm sending heart-to-heart hugs to all of you. Make sure you subscribe as we have more thought leaders coming to the table to have the big conversations. Take care and make it a phenomenal day. We will catch up with y'all next time.